Today's Bible reading comes from Matthew chapter 5, and I'm reading from verses 1 to 12. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you."
Okay, thanks, Sal, and Matt and Joel and everyone else who was involved there. Lovely to get started. I'm really hoping my watch doesn't go off. My grandson was just playing with it, and he's done it before. He's set it, and I can't stop it. And he set the alarm one night that went off at 10:30, just after I'd gone to sleep, and it went off two nights in a row before I could fix it. So I'm hoping it doesn't. Maybe it'll send me an alarm to say you've got to stop talking now, I don't know. So, it's New Year. We're looking back to the future. If you try to stick with me as we run through some thoughts. I was given two instructions for this morning. One, keep it short. And it's not because I'm afraid the cricket's going to be over before I get home, though that's possible. It's because there's kids in church, because there's no kids programs, and so we're just keeping it short for the holidays. I don't know if I can match last week, which was 47 minutes or something, but we'll see how we go. Also, I'm following Nick. Now, Nick preached last Sunday, and that was last week, but it was also last year. He talked about reflecting on the year and doing things as a memorial to remember what God has done. But this is now 2025. And yes, you guessed it, I'm looking forward. Partly to just this year, but also beyond that. But before I start, I've actually got to finish getting dressed. Sorry. I didn't practice putting this on over a microphone or glasses. I hope this doesn't end badly. We're right, Will? Yeah, I think we're good. Okay. That's done. I will explain this later. So, New Year is about new beginnings, right? I've sort of always liked the way New Year follows Christmas. No-brainer, I guess, but I've just been reading through Matthew's Gospel, and it starts at the birth of Jesus. Then it's got those amazing genealogies for those who are into those sorts of things, before very quickly going on to John the Baptist and the temptation of Jesus, the calling of the first disciples, and then he goes up into the hills and gives us 3 chapters that we call the Sermon on the Mount. I think this story is the most amazing new beginning story of all. Everything changed with the birth of Jesus. Even turning over to 2025 is dated from the birth of Jesus. Today I want to partly reflect, therefore, on change. Many things change. But there are also some things that don't change. They can't change. I've got no idea what's going to change going into the future. Do we actually have an impact on the future? Can we change the future? I think we can. If you remember, Back to the Future movies, that's what they were based on. The idea that you could change the future if you actually change the past. Interesting concept. especially if you consider that for those that are in the future, we are the past. We are the past that might change their future. What we do or don't do actually matters. I don't really believe in fate. That's why I think our lives matter, because we can make a difference. It's important how we live those lives. This is even more so if we are Christians living in a world that is becoming rapidly anti-Jesus. But I'll come back to that thought later. So, New Year. It's always a time for reflection, a time for looking forward. I don't actually make New Year's resolutions. You can make promises to yourself anytime, and I don't think making them at New Year makes you any more likely to keep them. I actually tend to spend too much time looking backwards, I think. Possibly thinking of all the dumb things that I've done and said, that I wish I had a time machine to go back and be able to change them. I do try to be intentional about the future. We can actually learn a lot by reflecting on the past, but also pondering what the future might look like. So let's talk ties. We used to go to a small church in the country, and at one stage we went a year or so without a pastor. I used to take the occasional service, and after I preached one day, a good friend jokingly said to me that I had confused him. And it wasn't my sermon that was confusing, unlike today, some of you might say, but it was what I was wearing, or in this case, not wearing. It seemed my friend always played the game of trying to guess who was preaching by looking around the church to see who was wearing a tie. He reckoned that the only person in the church who was wearing a tie was obviously the person who was going to be preaching. Why? Well, I guess once upon a time, when you were preaching in a church, you would be dressed up. Everybody would have worn a tie, so you possibly had to wear a suit. So as time went on, if you were preaching, it sort of just hung on that maybe you wore a tie to look like you were serious about the job. The preacher was expected to get dressed up, even if everybody else wasn't. Now that practice just sort of hung around a little longer for the preacher. People still felt the preacher needed to be formal. That's all changed, of course, hasn't it? So I can take this thing off now. I don't need it. The point I'm trying to make is about change. In this case, a changing church. There are plenty of obvious changes, and there's many that are also not quite so obvious. Music is always a good one. I grew up at a church that had nothing but hymns. We had some modern style songs. I want you to think up like some jazzed up Billy Graham crusade type songs as being the modern style, but they were kept for youth events. But not only in that time were we teenagers who were obviously questioning and rebellious, but it was also like the 1970s. Even rock and roll was being reinvented. We eventually managed to get a bit of a beat going at church, and we had some good music. There was even Christian rock in some churches. I don't know if you know that guy, but I'm going to make an offer. If anybody under the age of 40 can tell me who that is later, if they just want to line up at that counter outside after church, they get a free coffee, okay? During the 70s, music got louder and it got faster. Now, if we fast forward 50 years or so, music is now slower than the old hymns ever were. But don't worry if you don't like it. Just wait another 20 or 30 years or so and it'll be changed again. I just hope I can still dance when that happens. I could go through lots of other changes. We talked about music and dress. There's styles of worship. We change instruments. The role of the clergy has changed. The architecture of the buildings, both outside and the way they're fitted out inside. The role of women. The place of kids in church. But it's not a history lesson. Or maybe just a little bit later. What I want to do is try to get you to imagine what change might look like into the future And to do that, I will examine a little bit of the past. Can you imagine Jesus' day? You had your normal Sabbath services. You had your normal sacrifices. There were even festivals, and Jesus celebrated those festivals. But then Jesus comes along and he turns everything upside down. No wonder the religious leaders were upset. Their world was being threatened. So we move on to the Beatitudes. Everything that Jesus said was opposite. How would people have perceived this? They would either sat in awe at what he was saying, or they would have thought he was a stark, raving lunatic. Do you think the disciples could have even foreseen the church of the 21st century? I doubt very much they could have even foreseen the church of the 4th century, when Christianity became accepted. It was culturally acceptable then. I'll get the word in a sec. They certainly couldn't have foreseen the 19th century, where on Sunday virtually every person in a Western country went to church. It was the done thing. It was acceptable. It was almost compulsory. That's changed a bit though, hasn't it? What about us? Can we imagine a future where Christianity is no longer acceptable but unacceptable? It's actually happening, isn't it? We just had Christmas and New Year. How do you reflect on a holiday season where instead of Happy Christmas, people wish you Happy Holidays? I'm sure they don't even consider the fact that holiday is actually Holy Day. Now the history lesson. What do you know about festivals? Christmas, Easter, etc. They're Christian festivals, right? Well, maybe. But they're also possibly Christianized pagan festivals. That's not evil, by the way. It was a good idea to take the old ideas and show how God could use them. I'm okay with that. But it is fascinating to watch our world take these old festivals and now remove God from them. I cringe on Christmas Eve when the news channels cut to the control tower at the airport to get a flight report for Santa. Our society is still spiritual, but we've replaced Jesus' birth with Santa Claus, and we've replaced Jesus' death and resurrection with the Easter Bunny. But what about other festivals? Halloween was always a pagan festival. It became Christian. Now it's reverted to pagan. New Year has never been Christianized, which is probably a good thing, because it's really a pagan celebration to the god Janus, i.e. January. The one that upsets me the most, though, is Mardi Gras. It never was a pagan festival. It was always Christian. It celebrated the start of Lent. But without being too specific, it's been totally hijacked by secular interests. So what's the point? The point is that things change. All things change. Well, not quite all things. And this is what I want you to consider as we move into the new year. The world may be different. There could be war. There will be conflict. There will be famines. We still won't be able to trust our politicians. But there will also actually be things that don't change. Some things can't change. We can't say what the future will be like, but we can know how we should live in that future. Let's go back to the Bible reading. Sally read from the Beatitudes, from the Sermon on the Mount. Everything is upside down. I could go through them all, but I'm sure that you know what I mean. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the pure in heart. I actually wonder whether any of our world leaders have ever read these words. Blessed are you when you're persecuted, etc., etc. But the Beatitudes are not the only thing that was preached at the Sermon on the Mount. You see, the Old Testament prophets, they give us a glimpse of what the Messiah might be like. The New Testament writers have built a theology around what the Gospels said Jesus was like. But in the Sermon on the Mount, we have arguably the greatest, longest message that Jesus himself actually ever preached. That's recorded. He may have spoke longer elsewhere. But it's the most complete sermon we've got that Jesus spoke. We have the very words of Jesus. And this is our guide to the future, regardless of what the world throws at us. So, I'm not going to dwell on the Beatitudes. I want to look at the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. The other 2.5 chapters. Now, don't panic. I'm not going to read it all, and I'm not even going to try to explain it all. You'll still be home for lunch. Apart from the Beatitudes, what else did Jesus say on the Sermon on the Mount? Remember that these are clear instructions. They're straight from Jesus. I'm going to do a Gordo's paraphrase, though. It's a summary, and I'm going to do it quickly. 2.5 chapters reduced to 13 lines. If you feel like you've been hit by a machine gun, that's okay. Most people take little bits of the Sermon on the Mount and preach whole sermons on one verse. I don't want to do that. I want you to feel the enormity of what Jesus was saying. Staccato style. I want you to take home with you the clear instructions that Jesus gave that should make Christians different. Yes, different, not the same as the rest of our society. Christians need to show the society that we live in that what Jesus said and did was different, and that as Christians, we must be different. I'm going to read the points fairly slowly. I'm not going to ask you to reflect on them for 30 seconds at the end. No, I'm going to ask you to take them with you and reflect on them for the start of this new year, for the end of this year, and everywhere in between. Last week, Nick reflected on having a memorial place, something that we have, a place or a thing that can remind us what God has done. I'm asking you to do the same thing, have some way of remembering what it is that God wants you to do and to be. Now, apart from communion at the end, I will conclude with this. So try to let this sink in as you prepare for communion, and then take these thoughts home with you and live by them for the new year. Jesus said, "Be the salt of the earth, the light of the world. Act like it. Don't hide. Be righteous. Keep the law. Don't even think bad things about others." In relationships, the partner you have is all you need. Divorce isn't God's plan A. Be honest with your words and your actions. Make your yes mean yes and your no mean no. Never seek retaliation. Turn it around. Love those who hurt you. Give quietly, pray quietly, fast quietly. They're all between you and God. Note, it's assumed that you'll actually do them, but don't make a fanfare about them. Make sure your priorities are right. Seek God first, and He will provide everything that you need. You'll be judged by how you judge others. Put God first and always treat others as you would want to be treated. Living this way is the best way, but it can be hard. Be wary of people who say one thing and do another, including in the church. Build your life on the Word of God, and you'll be able to withstand everything this world throws at you. Now, I want you to go into 2025 and live the way Jesus said to live. Remember WWJD? What would Jesus do? Another passing phase that is long gone. Bring it back, at least in your heart. Live the way that Jesus said we should live. That can be daunting if you read that list of things that Jesus said we should do. But remember, in the first part of the reading, in the Beatitudes, one of the Beatitudes was, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." If you know you can't do that on your own, you are blessed because Jesus will sustain you. It's not your strength, but His. Now, of course, as I said before, I was going to finish with communion, and that is another thing that can't change. Communion can change in style, but it can't change in substance. We do it because Jesus said to do it. He told us to eat and drink, and in doing so, remember that His body was broken and His blood was shed for us. Please come, take communion in your own time, and let us join together in this meal of remembrance. Amen.